Futures trading involves risk and is not suitable for all investors. Content provided in this segment is meant for educational purposes and is not a solicitation to buy or sell commodities.
Hi, it's Steve and Joe from Fresh Agenda, Everag's Global Insights team. And Steve, we're back again with a very interesting GDT result this week, the correction that had to come really. So we're going to really focus in on that. And then instead of chart of the week, we've got issue of the week, Steve.
Can't wait. So just in the lead up to GDT, a bit of a softer butter market in Europe. So there's several things could be playing into this. I mean, the weather's still quite erratic, and that might be just dampening demand because we're getting cool weather again in the next week or so. But also we've got a bit more milk production coming through, particularly France, a bit stronger. So there's a number of factors in that. The skim market in New Zealand also going down. I think that's a response, Joe, to last week's pulse, which was pretty negative.
Yes.
And then in the US, the cheese market's always providing some interest. Short-term futures come off a bit, but a bit stronger later. Interesting mix. But there's a lot of movement in this space. Prices are moving around quite a bit, a lot of different signals.
Sure.
So this event.
Yeah, very much, an expected correction, Steve. You've got a fun fact about event 359, in fact.
So what I've gone back and looked at is the event-to-event change in volumes. Because we see quite a ramp-up in July, August, in volumes offered. And this is the biggest step up in offered volumes in percentage terms in 8 years, from June to July. So it's not a shock that there's more product on offer. It happens every year pretty much, but it's just a bit of a bigger lift at a time when we've got some very heady prices on the fat side.
Sure. And so overall, the price index came down 6.9%, but there was, as you said, carnage in fat, Steve, 11% down for both butter and AMF. Butter is retraced to where it was 5 events ago, and AMF is back where it was in February this year, Steve. So skim milk powder has also pulled lower with the weaker EU sentiment, and as you said, we saw that step down in the pulse last week. Whole milk powder and cheddar have been caught a bit in the action, but they've got their own issues as well. So that's a pretty ugly board across the commodities there, Steve.
One of the ugliest we've seen in a while. I had to look hard to find any green cells in our results sheet.
So New Zealand, looking across those indicators, New Zealand's now the cheapest source of cheese. Skim milk powder's kind of levelled up, just with the EU and US markets responding a little bit there. But yeah, pretty level across the board there, Steve.
Demand was profoundly weaker. Across commodities, whole milk the closest to average, and this is about 100 event average we show in the orange bars. But yeah, look at AMF, quite poor. And I won't bore you with those other charts, Joe, that I normally bore you with. But just some seasonality here, which is interesting and amazing, really, when you look at the comparison. So we pulled out this a while ago to just show how GDT prices track through the year. This is the butter price, and this is relative to the first event of the year. So if that's 100, then you're showing here what we see, event to event. And we're tracking so closely to last year's price development. Interesting to see where that goes. So it's a little wonder we have a correction with this going on.
Sure.
And here's some of the reason. This reduction in butter availability on GDT, which started at the beginning of the year, now we're catching up. And it's caught up all right because you see butter there, that's a bigger dip. AMF is more dramatic as to what the reductions have been compared to last year. So when we've brought them back up, it's not a surprise. If we look at this goes back a while. When we see lower volumes, we get higher prices, and when the volumes pick up, prices fall. So this is just 4 years. I think if we went back the history of GDT, AMF on GDT, we'd see this plays out over the long haul. It's not a surprise. 35 to 40% of AMF produced in New Zealand is sold on GDT.
Sure.
So there's going to be a high dependence from customers to come to this event, and if the volumes are pulled back, then naturally this is the place they have to buy. So it's
supply and demand works again, Steve.
It does.
This was another interesting one from last event, Steve. This very big ramp up in those further out contracts, which were corresponding to when New Zealand production would be ramping up. Do you think somebody went, made a mistake?
So this is what usually happens later in the year. It gets colder, doesn't it? And then product gets hard to get. No, not in New Zealand. So this is corrected, and it's pulled, nearly $350 on average across those later contracts and added quite a bit. I mean, the C2 price came off 3%. The average for skim was down 6.5%. This is where the rest of it came from.
Sure.
Because they're quite heavy falls.
Mm-hmm. And this was an interesting one, just the premium on like-for-like products between New Zealand and Arla, Steve. So that premium's dropped $100 a tonne on this event. So quite a narrowing of that premium.
It's interesting, the Arla prices went up this event, on average $19, whereas, we had a heavy fall in New Zealand. So,
yeah, I mean, we know Europe's supply and stocks are still quite low and limited, but obviously not the same concerns out of New Zealand.
So where did the sales go, those that were made? So in China's whole milk powder went up a little bit, but it's higher volumes on offer, so this is not really all that fantastic. Same with skim milk powder. The involvement was a little bit better than last time, but nothing that caused a rush at all. In Southeast Asia, the whole milk powder support remained quite good. That's tracked up higher. Skim milk powder is bouncing around near the best volumes of the year, but but the percentage involvement from this region was also down in skim milk powder. So you're pretty lackluster on the demand side across products.
And this premium or discount to butter that we see from AMF, Steve, that has gone down strongly last week, but just recovered a little bit this week. So just a bit more out of butter than AMF. And the whole milk powder analysis, this is just comparing EU skim milk prices and New Zealand AMF in kind of a synthetic price against whole milk powder. So the whole milk powder discount was holding for a while there, but it's just dropped $80 a tonne on this later result.
With both skim and AMF coming off quite a bit.
Yeah. So some interesting trends there, but not a great result, you would have to say, across the board for anyone watching. So
where it leaves us, so these forward butter curves have certainly fallen again. So that gap between, in December, if you draw an imaginary line, if you squint and draw a line between those points, nearly $1,000 between Europe and New Zealand. That's enough to move product.
Sure.
And enough to start to soften that forward line in Europe, you would think.
Yes, you would have to think that those high prices will be solved in the near future.
Skim milk powder, this has brought a dose of reality back to the forward curve from Oceania. New Zealand futures are still more optimistic about where it goes, and quite a fraying of prices here as you go further out. So it's different. I mean, the tighter supplies in the northern hemisphere are probably playing into this difference, whereas New Zealand's got a lot more product coming.
Yeah, interesting.
Okay, so Jo, it's not a chart of the week.
Yeah, look, we're having a little break from the chart of the week. You may have heard there's been some big news out of the US this week, some interesting developments, and it's not what you think. We had some recommendations from the USDA on federal milk marketing order changes, Steve. And while we're definitely not the experts, we would encourage you to, if you're not on the mailing list, to listen to the commercial call this week with you, Steve, Phil Plord, and Bill Curley, who do an amazing job in terms of breaking this all out. But some of the highlights here, we've seen a move to the higher of either Class 3 or Class 4 for Class 1 price calculations, an increase in the standard component levels, just reflecting the reality of what's happening with milk production, and probably most would say well overdue update to the make allowances. They've gone up quite a little bit. Interesting, though, a removal of barrels from the Class 3 price formula, and that does have some major implications for the way the market actually operates, Steve.
Yeah.
And the other ones, they're incorporating an ESL adjustment to the Class 1 price and an update in Class 1 differential. So I guess what we've been talking about, Steve, is what the removal of barrels means for perhaps the propensity to export from the US.
Yeah, I would encourage people to listen to the way Bill Curley talks about this in our call. You can listen to that or get the transcript. It's just how the US manufacturers, they balance the barrels in the cheese manufacturing sector, and that's causes a lot of variation between block and barrel pricing. It's certainly a major behaviour issue and a challenge going forward then that you might find frequently a higher milk price going into barrel manufacturing where that variation in price might be a penalty. So I would encourage you to go and have a listen to that. It's quite a good description of the challenge now and what it means. There's certainly going to be some implications for manufacturing. The make allowance is also quite interesting. That's That's given a greater deal of recompense to cheese manufacturers in particular, but or across the board really, to improve the allowance for cost of conversion. So,
and important while there's been so much cheese investment going on and coming on stream, Steve, there would be quite a few manufacturers certainly that would be welcoming this. But
yeah, it's a fair package.
It is a fair package. And again, recommendations, not law yet or anything, but it's great to have such smart colleagues that know about this stuff and can talk about it. So again, as Steve said, definitely do yourself a favour and have a listen to that.
To the Phil and Bill show.
The Phil and Bill show, that's right.
Okay. Well, that's a good wrap, Joe. That's all from us this week. We will be having a break next week. We won't be here for another 2 weeks, so we'll see you then.